So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the government refuses to publish economic benefits of latest Brexit deal. So the government has refused to publish an estimate of an economic benefits or the economic benefits of its latest planned Brexit trade deal. So I want to be charitable and say that the government, say to the government that they're right. This deal is an enhanced deal with Israel, rather than a fully fledged free trade agreement. But it's more like an add-on, like DLC if you play games and hate the games industry like I do. But this lot are the same ones who claim memorandums of understanding are trade deals. You know, with the Americans, they say, "Oh, we've got a trade deal with like Utah," and it's like a memorandum of understanding, which means nothing. So yeah, for them to use this dodge, it's not going to fly to say, "Oh, it's an enhanced deal, so we won't publish the GDP or whatever the impact assessment reports." Ministers had faced mockery over the small benefits to the economy expected from previous free trade deals, with most giving tiny GDP boosts, and that's only if the forecasts are to be believed in their best case scenarios. The article is referencing the really bad Australia and New Zealand deals. They add little to nothing to GDP and will cause a lot of damage to our already struggling agricultural industry. So it looks like the Tories are trying to hide lackluster trade figures. The Department for International Trade has now decided not to publish a figure from an enhanced agreement with Israel, arguing that it isn't appropriate. And I don't understand why the government would take this line unless the numbers are really negligible. But if that's the case, why bother to fully announce it? Why not just bury it in a press release or something? Opposition parties say the government should be more transparent about its trade talks and come up with an estimate, though economists say the benefits of the renegotiated deal could be difficult to measure. It should not be that hard to measure, given all the deals, or in this case the advanced deal, should really have impact assessment reports done, so that you know how people, businesses and the economy will be impacted by the deal. Like, it just makes sense. Otherwise, how will you know such a deal is beneficial in the first place and you're not just wasting your time? But official documentation for an enhanced deal with Israel, released in November, did not include a GDP figure. Department for International Trade has now confirmed to The Independent that it has no plans to release a figure. Time and time again, ministers are avoiding scrutiny and transparency on their trade policy. It's little wonder when it isn't delivering for British businesses and communities, said Labour Shadow Minister Gareth Thomas. He said Labour and government would ensure all trade deals are properly thought through and scrutinised, and that they would work for all sectors and regions. And I would be surprised if there's any trade deal in the history of all fairly done trade deals that worked for every sector. Otherwise, one side would get no real benefit at all. Take the EU-Canada deal, for example. Canada gained more access to the EU for exports, but now Canadian cheese makers have to compete with EU cheese makers, which means they have lost out financially. Not every sector will get a win, otherwise one side has really bad trade negotiators, like we have in this country. Sarah Green, the Liberal Democrats trade spokesperson, said if Conservative ministers have nothing to hide, they have nothing to fear. You know, the classic CIA argument. Officials at Department of International Trade say they have not modelled the GDP impact of an improved UK-Israel free trade agreement for two principled reasons, so buckle up. Firstly, the agreement is a revision of an already existing free trade agreement rather than a brand new deal, and secondly, the changes are only expected to cover specific sectors rather than all goods and services. And this is all fine, but there should still be some sort of impact assessment. Unless the impact is negligible, this advanced deal is mainly based around services. So given that the UK is a service powerhouse, could you really not tell us how much this would help the service sector? Something just seems off here. For previous agreements, government economists ran a so-called computable general equilibrium model, which gave an expected impact assessment across the whole economy. So that's how their modelling typically worked. It's weird jargon. Professor Michael, director of the UK Trade Policy Observatory at the University of Sussex, Business School and co-director of the Centre of Inclusive Trade Policy, goddamn what a mouthful that is, told The Independent that the Department of International Trade's reasoning makes sense. He says, I think there is too much of a focus on overall impact of an agreement. It is perfectly possible that an agreement has little impact, for example 0.1% of GDP, but there may be some big winners and losers underneath that, he said. Maybe there are not that many winners, hence why the Tories are being coy over, the impact of the report or the deal. The Tories think it'll add £78 million to the economy without giving a timescale, like that much a year or over 5 years. And I kind of get his point, but why not just say, why can't the government just say it'll add this much to these industries, for example, or give us better access to these industries in Israel that we use? It doesn't make sense. Professor Michael said it might be the case that modelling digital services and financial services is very difficult, meaning the results could be unreliable. But they could still give us a best case scenario, though, right? Like, that's what I don't get. Maybe you should make your own models for these kind of things. He said it was more important for the government to explain its offensive goals in the talks, exactly what it's asking Israel for in the deal and what it's prepared to offer in return. And the Tories really haven't listed their aims for free trade agreements or even enhanced deals. We know that the Australia's trade aims are to get rid of tariffs and quotas on all their agricultural exports, or as much as they can. What does the UK actually want beyond hollow trade deals that add nothing to little to our GDP? The planned Israel Free Trade Agreement is an enhancement of an agreement signed between the EU and Israel, so a rollover deal. Though this fact has not featured prominently in the government's communication about talks. The government says it wants to sign a new innovation-focused trade deal focusing on services and digital sectors. Talks were launched in July by then Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan. A Department for International Trade spokesperson said a free trade deal with Israel will enhance our £5 billion trade relationship and boost UK service exports to Israel by up to £78 million. So clearly she knows that it's going to, she knows how much trade we do relative with Israel. So surely you could give us a figure on this service increase. Given the UK service sector is worth around £2.6 trillion, so this deal adds less than 0.01% to the service sector. So not a lot, depending on how good my maths is. As you know, maybe if I did maths until 18, I would have been a lot smarter. Who knows? As UK-Israel talks are focused on enhancing specific sectors that have rapidly grown demand, such as digital, technology and financial services, it isn't appropriate to us to use the same modelling as we do in such deals as Australia and New Zealand, but they did try and get certain service agreements within the Australia and New Zealand deal, so that kind of modelling I think does exist. And why don't they just create new models then? Like, this deal adds so little and gives the UK more of a framework for future deals, but really, if the UK wants to focus more of these advanced deals, they should have their own model set up. It just makes sense to, figure out what the impact of these deals are and how it's going to impact certain industries, like the service sector, for example, because now the service sector is going to have to compete more. They are more able to compete with Israeli companies, but this means Israeli companies are more able to potentially compete with them. So for them to not have impact assessment reports seems bizarre, but anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.